Naomi Bennett never imagined she would spend a night behind bars, especially not in the quiet town of Brookhaven, North Carolina, just outside Charlotte. A beloved teacher and devoted community volunteer, she had dedicated her day to guiding children through exhibits at the Frederick Douglass Memorial Center, sharing lessons about the power of history and activism. As the sun set over the North Carolina skyline, Naomi drove home, her mind still filled with the echoes of children's laughter and the brunk of inspiring young minds. The summer air was thick with humidity, and the sky was painted in shades of deep orange and pink, a beautiful contrast to the nightmare about to unfold. With the radio humming softly in the background, Naomi was lost in thought, wondering if she had enough vegetables at home for a stir-fry, when the piercing glow of red and blue lights filled her rearview mirror. Her stomach tightened. She wasn't speeding. Her taillights were working fine. What could they possibly want? She signaled and pulled over to the side of the highway, carefully following protocol. The police cruiser screeched to a stop behind her, headlights illuminating the inside of her car like a spotlight in the darkness. Her heart pounded as she reached for her driver's license and registration, already anticipating the interaction. As a black woman driving alone in a predominantly white town, Naomi had heard too many horror stories. She had always believed in remaining calm, respectful, and compliant, but deep down she knew that sometimes it didn't matter how polite you were. Some people had already made up their minds about you. The officer approached her window, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "Good evening, officer," Naomi greeted, her voice steady but cautious. The man didn't respond to her courtesy. Instead, he flicked on his flashlight, shining it directly into her eyes, forcing her to squint. "License and registration," he barked. She handed them over, keeping her hands visible. The name on his uniform read Officer Travis Reed. A second officer, Brian Cooper, loomed a few steps behind, surveying her car like a predator sizing up its prey. Reed took his time flipping through her documents, moving at an agonizing pace. Cooper peered into the back seat, his eyes scanning for something, anything, to justify this stop. Finally, Reed spoke. "Your headlight is out," he stated flatly. Naomi blinked. "That was impossible. Also, your taillight is flickering," and he added. She knew her car was in perfect condition when she left Charlotte earlier. She had checked before getting on the highway, but she also knew arguing wouldn't help. "Do you have anything in the trunk?" Cooper cut in, his voice sharp. "Just groceries and some teaching materials," Naomi answered politely. "Step out of the car, ma'am." The words hit her like a ton of bricks. "Excuse me?" She tried to keep her voice level. "Can I ask why?" Reed's grip on his flashlight tightened. "We need to search your vehicle," he said. "We have reason to believe you might be transporting illegal substances." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Her worst fears had just become reality. Her pulse thundered as she unfastened her seatbelt and slowly stepped out of the car. The thick North Carolina heat clung to her skin, but a deeper chill ran through her veins. The two officers flanked her, their presence suffocating. She glanced around, hoping a passing car might slow down and witness what was happening, but the road was nearly deserted. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Cooper ordered. Naomi complied, raising her hands to shoulder height, a universal sign of surrender. Reed smirked as he stared at her California license. "You're a long way from home," he commented. "I've been living here for over a year," Naomi explained, trying to keep her voice even. "My license is still valid. North Carolina hasn't required me to change it yet." "Shut it," Reed snapped, cutting her off. Cooper had already begun rifling through her trunk, tossing aside her grocery bags and history books without care. Naomi's chest tightened as he pulled pamphlets and papers from her teaching materials, crumpling them carelessly. "I don't see anything," Cooper muttered after a minute, disappointment evident in his voice. Reed's eyes narrowed. "What's in your purse?" he demanded. Naomi hesitated for a fraction of a second, and that was all they needed. Reed grabbed her purse off the hood of the car, rummaging through it like it was his own property. Her phone slipped out, crashing onto the pavement. "Sir, that's my personal property," she protested, trying to keep her voice steady. Then it happened. Cooper suddenly pulled out a small plastic bag filled with white powder. Naomi's breath caught. Her entire body went cold. That wasn't hers. She had never seen that bag in her life. Her mind raced as she watched the sick grin spread across Cooper's face. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look what we have here." "That's not mine," Naomi cried, panic setting in. Reed didn't even hesitate. "You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Naomi barely had time to react before her arms were yanked behind her back. Cold, unyielding metal snapped around her wrists. The handcuffs were too tight, biting into her skin. "This is a mistake," she protested, her voice desperate, trembling, but firm. "I was volunteering in Charlotte all day. Check the security cameras at the center. Ask anyone." But they weren't listening. They had already decided her fate. As she was shoved into the back of the police cruiser, Naomi's eyes darted toward her cracked phone, lying abandoned on the pavement. There was only one person who could save her now, her sister, the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. They had no idea who they had just arrested, and by the time they found out, it would be too late, because Gabrielle Bennett was coming, and she was bringing the full weight of the law with her. The night air in Brookhaven, North Carolina was thick with heat, the remnants of the scorching summer sun still clinging to the pavement. Naomi Bennett's world was spinning as Officer Travis Reed and Officer Brian Cooper tightened the cold steel handcuffs around her wrists. Her mind screamed in protest. This wasn't happening. She wasn't a criminal. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being dragged toward the police cruiser as though she were some dangerous felon. The tiny plastic bag Cooper held between his fingers, a bag filled with white powder she had never seen before, was now the so-called evidence against her. "That's not mine," she cried again, her voice breaking. "I don't do drugs. I was volunteering at the Frederick Douglass Memorial Center all day. Ask anyone." Her words were swallowed by the heavy silence between the officers. They didn't care. They had already decided her fate. Cooper smirked. "Yeah, sure," he mocked. "That's what they all say." With a rough yank, Reed spun her around, slamming her forward onto the blistering hot hood of the police car. She winced as the heat seared her skin through her thin blouse. "Stay still," he ordered. She felt his unforgiving grip on her shoulder as he secured the cuffs, ensuring they were tight enough to cut off circulation. She bit her tongue, trying not to let the pain show. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. As the officers threw her belongings onto the asphalt, rifling through her things as though she weren't even standing there, Naomi's eyes darted to her phone, lying face down, its screen now cracked from the fall. She had one chance, one number memorized, one person who could turn this around. Her sister, Gabrielle Bennett, the Attorney General of the United States. The officers had no idea who they had just arrested. The 30-minute drive to the Brookhaven police precinct felt endless. Naomi sat in the back seat of the cruiser, the tight handcuffs cutting into her wrists, her breathing shallow. Her thoughts raced. She knew what happened to people like her. Innocent black men and women who got caught up in a corrupt system, accused of crimes they never committed, railroaded before they even had a chance to fight back. She wouldn't be one of them. She couldn't. As they approached the precinct, a beige brick building tucked off a side street near the courthouse, dread pooled in her stomach. She had never even stepped inside a police station before. Now she was about to be booked as a criminal. Cooper and Reed yanked her out of the car the moment they arrived. No words. No explanations, just rough hands dragging her forward. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile, artificial glow as she was shoved through the entrance. A bored receptionist tapped behind bulletproof glass, barely sparing her a glance as the officers led her past the processing area and into a cramped, windowless room. Inside, an old metal desk sat in the middle of the room, covered in coffee stains and scattered papers. Cooper took a seat across from her, his eyes filled with casual cruelty. Reed loomed behind her, arms crossed, like a predator waiting to pounce. Cooper slowly opened a manila folder, deliberately dragging out the moment. "Naomi Bennett," he read aloud, his voice dripping with mock surprise. 34 years old, a teacher at the Brookhaven Community Center. His eyebrow arched, as though the idea of a black woman teaching children was some sort of novelty. Naomi swallowed her rage. "I also volunteer in Charlotte," she said, her voice level but firm. "I teach kids about civil rights and history. I am not a criminal." Reed let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Oh, you're not a criminal?" he mocked. "Because we found drugs in your purse, and last I checked, that's illegal." Naomi felt sick. She clenched her fists, her entire body trembling with rage. She knew the truth. These men had planted that evidence, but it was her word against theirs. And in Brookhaven, North Carolina, she already knew whose word would be believed. Cooper leaned in, a smug smirk on his face. So, he said, you want to tell us where you got the cocaine? Naomi's jaw clenched. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay calm. I've never touched drugs in my life, she said through gritted teeth. Reed scoffed. Maybe you weren't selling. Maybe you were holding for someone else. I don't know what you're talking about, she shot back. Cooper's smirk faded. He sat back, arms crossed. Look, we can make this real easy for you, he said. Tell us who gave you the drugs, and maybe we talk about a deal. Naomi's stomach churned. A deal? They were trying to coerce a confession. They wanted her to give them a name, any name, so they could justify this setup. She wouldn't do it. I want my phone call, she said, her voice unwavering. Reed and Cooper exchanged a look. Cooper sighed dramatically, then nodded toward the door. Fine, he said. You want your call? Let's go. They marched her into a dimly lit hallway, stopping in front of a single payphone mounted on the wall. Her wrists were still cuffed, forcing her to awkwardly maneuver the receiver. Cooper stood so close behind her that she could feel his breath on her neck. She blocked him out. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number, the only one that mattered. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then a sharp click. Naomi! The voice on the other end was calm but alert. Gabrielle Bennett. Naomi exhaled a shaky breath. I'm in trouble, she whispered. She didn't have to say much. Gabrielle immediately understood. Where are you? Brookhaven PD, Naomi murmured, her voice tight with fear. Silence, then a single measured response. I'm on my way. The line went dead. Naomi hung up the phone. She felt Cooper's eyes on her, watching, waiting. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze with newfound resolve. You're gonna regret this, she said, her voice steady. Cooper's smirk returned. I don't think so, he said. Naomi just stared at him, because he had no idea. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life, because Gabrielle Bennett was coming. And when she arrived, Brookhaven would never be the same again. Naomi Bennett clenched her fists beneath the cold steel of the handcuffs, her wrists aching from where the metal dug into her skin. She sat in the dimly lit interrogation room of Brookhaven Police Precinct, facing Officer Travis Reed and Officer Brian Cooper, the men responsible for her wrongful arrest. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand justice, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she inhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain calm. She met Cooper's eyes with quiet defiance, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. Those weren't my drugs, she said, and you know it. Cooper leaned forward, his smirk widening. Oh yeah, he taunted. Then how'd they end up in your purse, sweetheart? Naomi didn't flinch. I have the right to a phone call, she said, her words slow and measured. Reed scoffed. Oh, we'll get to that, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. But first, you're going to answer some questions. He slammed a folder onto the table, flipping it open with exaggerated care. Where'd you get the cocaine? Naomi stared at him, her stomach twisting. I didn't, she said firmly. I've never touched drugs in my life. Reed rolled his eyes, flipping through the file. Cooper chuckled. Maybe you were holding it for someone, he suggested. You know, just doing a little favor for a friend? Naomi's hands curled into fists. She could feel the heat of her anger rising, but she knew she had to stay in control. I want my phone call, she repeated, her voice unwavering. Cooper and Reed exchanged a glance. Reed let out a dramatic sigh. Fine, he muttered. Let's get this over with. They marched Naomi into a narrow hallway where an old payphone was bolted to the wall. Her wrists were still cuffed, forcing her to awkwardly maneuver the receiver. Cooper stood right behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath on the back of her neck. He wanted her to know she wasn't alone. He wanted her to feel trapped. She ignored him. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number, the only number that mattered. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Naomi's heart pounded, then a sharp click. Naomi! The voice on the other end was calm but alert. Gabrielle Bennett. Naomi's breath hitched. I'm in trouble, she whispered, glancing at Cooper from the corner of her eye. She could feel him watching her. Where are you? Gabrielle asked, her voice immediately crisp and professional. I'm at the Brookhaven PD, Naomi said. They planted drugs on me. For a moment, there was silence. Then Naomi heard the shift in her sister's voice, the one she had only heard a handful of times. The voice of a woman who had prosecuted corrupt officials, who had stood before the highest courts in the nation, who had brought down men who thought they were untouchable. Gabrielle Bennett, the Attorney General of the United States, was no longer speaking as Naomi's sister. She was speaking as the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. "Listen to me carefully," Gabrielle said, her tone like steel. "Say nothing else to them. Do not answer another question. Do you understand me?" Naomi nodded even though her sister couldn't see. "Yeah," she whispered. Gabrielle's voice softened for a second. "Are you safe?" Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes, but she knew she wasn't. "I don't know," she admitted. Gabrielle's voice hardened again. "I'll make some calls," she said. "Don't worry, we'll figure this out." And then, just before the line disconnected, "I promise." Cooper snatched the receiver from Naomi's hand, slamming it back onto the cradle. "All done?" he asked mockingly. Naomi didn't answer. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Something about her silence must have unsettled him, because Cooper's smirk faltered for just a second. Then he grabbed Naomi by the arm and yanked her back toward her holding cell. As the door clanged shut behind her, Naomi exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. She had done what she needed to do. Now she had to wait. Wait for Gabrielle to arrive. Wait for the storm to hit Brookhaven PD. They thought she was just another black woman they could intimidate, silence, and bury in the system. But they were wrong. Very, very wrong. The first light of morning crept through the high, barred window of Naomi's holding cell. She had barely slept. The sounds of footsteps, the clinking of keys, the low murmurs of other detainees, all of it kept her awake. But most of all, it was the anticipation. She didn't know when Gabrielle would arrive, but she knew she would. And when she did, nothing in Brookhaven PD would ever be the same. Outside the cell block, the officers on duty changed shifts. A tall, thin man with prominent cheekbones, Officer Malik Taylor, took over the desk, glancing at Naomi as he scanned her booking report. For a moment, she saw something different in his expression. Was it doubt? Naomi held his gaze. But before she could say anything, the front doors of the precinct slammed open. Raised voices echoed down the hall. A commotion. Something was happening. Naomi's heart pounded. Then the sound of heels clicking against the tile floor. Sharp, deliberate, and unapologetic. A voice clear and unwavering. "Where is Naomi Bennett?" Naomi's breath caught. She knew that voice. Gabrielle Bennett had arrived, and Brookhaven PD was about to learn exactly who they had messed with. The fluorescent lights of Brookhaven Police Precinct cast a harsh, sterile glow on the cold concrete floor. Naomi Bennett sat stiffly in her cell, exhaustion weighing down her limbs. Sleep had been impossible. Every sound, every footstep outside her cell had kept her nerves on edge. Then the shift changed. A tall, lean officer with sharp cheekbones, Officer Malik Thomas, stepped in, taking over from his tired colleague. He moved with efficiency, flipping through paperwork at the front desk. His eyes flickered to Naomi's cell. For the briefest second, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe even concern. He nodded politely but said nothing before disappearing into the back offices. Naomi held on to that moment. Maybe not all of them were against her, but the relief was short-lived. An hour later, the station door slammed open. Raised voices erupted down the hallway. Naomi sat upright, straining to hear. She couldn't make out the exact words, but she could hear the tension. Then, a voice rang out, clear and authoritative, cutting through the noise like a blade. It was a woman's voice, a voice Naomi knew all too well. Her heart pounded. Gabrielle Bennett was here. The tension in the station spiked like an electrical current. Officer Travis Reed's deep, gruff voice rose in protest, followed by Officer Brian Cooper's indignant sputtering. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Then the door to the holding area burst open. There, standing like a force of nature, was Gabrielle Bennett, Attorney General of the United States. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit, her dark brown eyes blazing with fury. Her hair, always neat and professional, was pulled into a tight bun. She wasn't alone. 2 federal agents flanked her, both clad in black suits, their expressions unreadable. One of them, an older man with graying hair, stepped forward. "Special Agent Michael Caldwell, FBI." His voice was steady, his presence commanding. He carried a leather folder tucked under his arm. Beside him stood a sharp-eyed woman with an earpiece, no doubt part of Gabrielle's security detail. Naomi exhaled sharply. This was really happening. Gabrielle's gaze scanned the row of cells, her face a mask of cold, controlled rage. And then her eyes landed on Naomi. In that moment, Naomi felt both relief and sorrow. Relief because her sister was here. Sorrow because it had come to this. Officer Reed crossed his arms, his face reddening. Cooper, standing beside him, looked pale as a sheet, but desperately tried to maintain his confidence. Malik Thomas had quietly reappeared in the background, watching everything unfold, looking increasingly uneasy. Gabrielle didn't hesitate. Release her. Immediately. Her voice was calm but undeniable in authority. Reed recovered quickly, trying to stand his ground. Ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but that woman is under arrest for possession of cocaine. We're not just letting her walk out of here because you waltz in with an entourage. Cooper nodded quickly, voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. She's a suspect in an ongoing investigation. We have evidence. Gabrielle gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then she spoke. I am Gabrielle Bennett, United States Attorney General, and you have my sister, Naomi Bennett, falsely detained. The weight of her words crashed down on the room like a falling gavel. Gabrielle's sharp gaze flicked toward the cell bars. I have reason to believe your so-called evidence was fabricated. Now, I'm giving you one chance to correct your mistake before this becomes a federal civil rights case. The silence was deafening. Naomi saw Dixon's face drain of color. Reed's jaw clenched, his posture stiff with defiance, but his confidence had taken a hit. Cooper's eyes darted nervously between Gabrielle and the FBI agents. This is a local matter, Reed spat, though he sounded less certain than before. We're following procedure. Gabrielle's expression remained unreadable. I'll be taking it up with your chief, she said icily. Then she turned toward the female agent. Agent Lydia, please escort my sister out of this cell. Agent Lydia stepped forward, producing her official credentials. She met Reed's eyes, daring him to intervene. For a second, he considered it. Then he stepped back. Without another word, Lydia unlatched the cell door. Naomi stepped out, her body rigid, trying to steady herself. She was free, but this wasn't over. Chief, Cooper muttered urgently into his radio, we got a situation. Gabrielle and the FBI agents ignored him, guiding Naomi out of the cell block. As they moved toward the main lobby, Officer Malik Thomas stepped forward. He lowered his voice. You okay? He asked. Naomi nodded slightly, still too shaken to speak, but she saw something real in his expression. Doubt, uncertainty, guilt. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the rest. They entered a small meeting room where Chief Gerald Langston, a stocky man with thinning gray hair, waited. His face was red, his mouth pinched into a permanent scowl. He glared at Gabrielle. What exactly is the problem here? He demanded. Gabrielle's tone remained cool as she recited Naomi's story, the wrongful traffic stop, the planted evidence, the bogus charges. Langston's cheeks darkened, but he quickly tried to shift the blame. She was uncooperative, he said, suspicious. Officers were just doing their job. Gabrielle's arms crossed. Then show me the footage, she said. Langston blinked. Keller and Dixon exchanged a panicked look. We're still processing the footage, Reed stammered. Might have been a camera malfunction. Gabrielle's lips pressed into a thin line. Interesting, she said flatly, because the federal funding your department receives for body cameras requires full, unaltered records. I'll be requesting that footage immediately. A tense silence gripped the room. Then FBI agent Caldwell stepped forward. We'll be conducting a full investigation into this matter, he said, his voice calm but firm. If we find evidence that officers tampered with records or planted evidence, this will escalate to a federal civil rights case. Chief Langston swallowed hard. Naomi saw the panic in his eyes. Oh, you'll see a complaint, Gabrielle said, her tone like ice. You'll be seeing a lot more than that. Naomi felt relief wash over her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Brookhaven itself, and the storm was just beginning. The tension in the precinct was thick enough to cut with a knife. Chief Gerald Langston, his face tight with frustration, took a slow breath as he considered his next move. The presence of the FBI in the U.S. Attorney General in his station had completely upended what should have been a routine, if underhanded, arrest. He had spent years keeping order in Brookhaven his way, and he wasn't about to let an outsider like Gabrielle Bennett undermine him. "Let's all calm down," Langston finally said, forcing a neutral tone. "Miss Bennett is free to go, pending further investigation. We'll hold the alleged drug evidence until we can verify." Gabrielle's eyes locked onto his with an icy glare. "Do you honestly think that so-called evidence will hold up to federal scrutiny?" she asked, crossing her arms. "That little plastic bag might as well have your officer's fingerprints all over it, literal or otherwise." For the first time, Langston looked uneasy. Officer Malik Thomas, who had been standing quietly to the side, cleared his throat. "Chief, I think we should do as they say. If we have nothing to hide, cooperating is the best path." The moment he spoke, Officer Reed shot him a warning glare. But Malik didn't back down. He kept his eyes steady on Langston, challenging him in a way that made the chief hesitate. Langston pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling sharply. "All right," he muttered. "Officer Reed, Officer Cooper, gather all relevant evidence, including the body cam footage." He turned to Agent Caldwell. "Attorney General Bennett, Agent Caldwell, you'll have our full cooperation." Gabrielle gave a curt nod. "Excellent." Then her gaze softened as she turned toward Naomi. "Let's get you out of here." As they moved toward the station exit, Naomi felt every pair of eyes on her. Officers whispered amongst themselves, their low voices filled with anger and resentment. She had no doubt they were already scheming how to cover their tracks. Just as Naomi stepped into the lobby, she spotted a familiar figure, a woman with a notepad in one hand and a phone camera raised in the other. It was Patricia Norwood, a local journalist from the Brookhaven Gazette. "Miss Bennett, care to comment on," Patricia started, her eyes darting between Naomi and Gabrielle, her excitement barely contained. Before she could finish, the federal agents hurried Naomi and Gabrielle out of the building, ignoring the questions. Patricia managed to snap a few quick photos before the heavy station doors slammed shut behind them. Naomi's stomach twisted. Media attention could complicate everything. She turned to Gabrielle, whose face remained calm and composed. "We'll handle it," her sister reassured her. Outside, the morning sun and fresh air felt almost alien after the stifling oppression of the holding cell. Naomi inhaled deeply, steadying her pounding heart. Agent Caldwell gestured toward a sleek black SUV parked at the curb. "Let's get you somewhere safe. We'll convene with the team and figure out next steps." Naomi nodded, still trying to process everything. Yesterday, she had been a quiet community center teacher. Today, she was at the center of a scandal that could shake Brookhaven to its core. As the SUV pulled away, Naomi allowed herself a moment of hope. She wasn't alone. The truth would come to light. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. By late afternoon, the entire town of Brookhaven was buzzing. Word had spread fast. News of the high-profile arrest, the presence of the U.S. Attorney General, and the abrupt release of the suspect had ignited a storm of speculation. At the local diner, in grocery store aisles, and across social media, debates raged. Some residents were outraged, furious that their local police force could be involved in corruption. Others dismissed the situation entirely, convinced that outsiders were stirring up unnecessary trouble. Meanwhile, Naomi sat at a polished wooden table in a conference room at the FBI field office in downtown Atlanta. It was a nondescript government building near the courthouse, but inside everything hummed with efficiency. Gabrielle had insisted that Naomi undergo a full medical checkup after her release. Physically, she was fine, aside from exhaustion and bruises on her wrists from the handcuffs. Emotionally, however, she felt like she had been caught in a whirlwind. Across the table sat Agent Caldwell and a junior analyst, both already deep in their work, sifting through police logs, digital records, and paperwork. Gabrielle paced the length of the room, occasionally pausing to speak into her phone or examine a document. Naomi still wore the same clothes from the night before. The entire experience felt surreal. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, we've requested all dash cam and body cam footage from last night. Brookhaven PD claims the body cam malfunctioned, but they did provide dash cam recordings." He nodded to the analyst, who pressed a few keys on a laptop. A grainy video appeared on a large screen. Naomi held her breath as the footage played. It showed her car pulling over, Officer Reed's cruiser stopping behind her. She could see herself stepping out of the vehicle at the officer's command. Due to the angle, much of the scene was partially obstructed, but the audio was clear. She heard her own voice, polite but cautious. Is there a problem, officer? A few crackles and distortions interrupted the audio. Then Reed's voice, curt, impatient. Pop the trunk. She watched as Cooper rummaged through her things. Then, right at the crucial moment, the footage cut out. When the video resumed, Cooper was already holding the small plastic bag of white powder. The moment of discovery was missing. Naomi clenched her jaw. How convenient. Gabrielle's expression hardened. Just as we suspected, she muttered. The footage that would exonerate Naomi is conveniently gone. She turned to Caldwell. We need more than this. We need witness accounts. We need the original unedited files that might still exist on their servers. We also need to check if there were any external cameras nearby, traffic cams, business security cameras. Agent Caldwell nodded. We're already on it, Madam Attorney General. Just then there was a knock at the door. Everyone turned as an agent stepped inside. Ma'am, he said, his voice tense. We just received an official statement from Chief Langston. Gabrielle's eyes narrowed. And? The agent hesitated before continuing. The Brookhaven Police Department is doubling down. They're standing by their claim that Naomi was in possession of illegal substances. They're saying the FBI is interfering in local law enforcement, and they're pushing for the case to be handled at the state level. Silence settled over the room. Naomi's blood ran cold. Gabrielle let out a slow, steady breath. So they're not backing down. Caldwell's jaw tightened. No, ma'am, they're preparing for a fight. Naomi exhaled, her chest tightening. This wasn't just about her anymore. Brookhaven was about to become ground zero for a battle far bigger than she had ever imagined, and the fight for justice had only just begun. The tension in Brookhaven had reached a fever pitch. The scandal surrounding Naomi Bennett's wrongful arrest had spiraled into something much bigger than a single case of police misconduct. The town was dividing into two camps, those who believed the truth needed to come out, and those who saw it as an attack on their way of life. Naomi sat in a quiet corner of the FBI field office, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. Across from her, Gabrielle was reviewing notes, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. Despite the long hours and the weight of the situation, her sister's resolve remained unshaken. Ava glanced at her sister, emotions warring inside her. Maya, she started, her voice soft. I never wanted to drag you into this. Gabrielle looked up, her expression firm. You didn't drag me into anything, she said. This is what I do, and more importantly, you're my sister. I would do anything for you. Naomi swallowed the lump in her throat. I know. It's just, I never wanted to overshadow your work with personal issues. You have so many responsibilities already. Gabrielle's gaze softened. My responsibility is to uphold justice, and that's exactly what this is about. They sat in silence for a moment, lost in thought. Naomi let out a slow breath, steeling herself. This is going to get messy, isn't it? Gabrielle's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes. If the corruption in Brookhaven PD runs as deep as I suspect, they'll do anything to protect themselves. That means smearing you, me, and anyone who stands in their way. Naomi thought of the kids at the community center, the ones she had always told that truth and fairness would prevail if they stood strong. Now she had to believe it herself. I'll stand firm, she said, her voice steady. We'll expose them. Gabrielle nodded approvingly. That's the spirit. Just then, an FBI agent poked his head into the room holding a phone. There's a call from Miss Bennett, he announced. A reporter named Patricia Norwood from the Brookhaven Gazette. She's been calling repeatedly. Says she has new information. Naomi and Gabrielle exchanged a glance. Gabrielle shrugged. Couldn't hurt to hear what she has, but be cautious. Naomi picked up the phone. Patricia? Miss Bennett, thank you for taking my call, Patricia said. Her words rushed with urgency. I spoke to someone who was near the scene when you were pulled over. They might have phone footage of the arrest. Naomi sat up straighter, heart thumping. Someone recorded it? She could barely believe it. This could be the proof they needed to expose the officers. Yes, but they're scared to come forward, Patricia said quickly. They say they saw the second officer slip something into your purse. They were driving by and started filming because they sensed something was off. The video isn't perfect, but it shows enough to raise serious questions. Naomi covered the phone's mouthpiece and turned to Gabrielle, her eyes bright with hope. A bystander has cell phone footage. Gabrielle's eyes widened. Then for the first time in hours, she allowed herself a relieved smile. "We can arrange protection for that witness," she said firmly. "Miss Norwood, can you provide the FBI with their contact details? They'll be safe if they cooperate." Patricia hesitated. "I need to confirm with them first, but I believe they'd be open to that. I'll keep you posted." They ended the call, and Naomi immediately relayed the details to the rest of the team. Agent Caldwell wasted no time coordinating with local offices to set up a secure meeting for the witness. Gabrielle, meanwhile, placed a call to her contacts in the Civil Rights Division, briefing them on the new development. For the first time since this nightmare began, Naomi felt a surge of relief. There was proof. This wasn't just her word against the officers. If they could get that video safely into the right hands, Keller and Cooper would have no way to escape accountability. But beneath her relief, fear still lingered. People who exposed police misconduct often faced retaliation. She worried about the witness's safety and her own. Meanwhile, over at the Brookhaven Police Department, Chief Gerald Langston was scrambling to contain the situation. The media had caught wind of the scandal, and the pressure was mounting. Rumors spread that federal agents had uncovered deep-rooted corruption within the department. Local politicians, sensing the heat, started distancing themselves from the chief. Careful, non-committal statements like, "We are committed to justice for all," littered the news. Inside the precinct, officers Reed and Cooper were holed up in the briefing room with their union representative. Their faces were flushed with anger, their voices low and furious. "If that witness steps forward, we're done," Cooper muttered, his hands balled into fists. Reed's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with rage. "We handle it," he said coldly. "We just need to find out who it is." Unbeknownst to them, Officer Malik Thomas was standing just outside the door. He had heard enough to confirm what he had long suspected. This wasn't just about incompetence. These men were actively planning a cover-up. A knot of dread twisted in Malik's stomach. He had joined the force to serve and protect, not to watch fellow officers manipulate the system for their own prejudices. For months, he had noticed irregularities, missing footage, questionable reports, routine harassment of minorities. But he had never spoken up. Now, the highest law enforcement official in the country was involved. Malik exhaled slowly. Maybe this was his chance to do the right thing. But fear clawed at him too. Crossing the blue wall of silence came with consequences. As evening settled over Atlanta, Naomi and Gabrielle remained at the FBI office, preparing for the next steps. The entire town of Brookhaven felt on edge. Officer Malik quietly began gathering internal records, documents, reports, anything that could prove the corruption within the department. Meanwhile, Keller and Cooper schemed in the shadows, growing more desperate by the hour. The unknown witness debated whether to come forward or remain hidden. By midnight, a hush had fallen over Brookhaven streets, but no one was sleeping. Everyone sensed that a showdown was coming, and at the center of it all stood Naomi Bennett and her sister, the U.S. Attorney General. Two women determined to expose the corruption, no matter the cost. Little did they know, the final battle was just around the corner. Naomi Bennett spent the night in a secure hotel room arranged by the FBI, while Gabrielle continued coordinating from the field office. The weight of the ordeal still clung to her, but the knowledge that the truth was finally coming to light kept her steady. Early that morning, Patricia Norwood called again. "The witness is ready to come forward," she said, excitement lacing her voice. "She wants to meet at a neutral location with you and the FBI. We've arranged a safe meeting at an undisclosed site within the hour." Within minutes, Naomi, Gabrielle, and Agent Caldwell were in an FBI-issued SUV speeding toward a small law firm in downtown Atlanta. It was a quiet, neutral space, one where the witness felt secure enough to speak. On the drive, Naomi stared out the window at the sprawling cityscape. A mix of hope and dread twisted inside her. If this witness had real footage, it could be the smoking gun that proved her innocence. But once it came to light, the backlash would be fierce. When they arrived, they were ushered into a modest conference room with plain gray walls and a few motivational posters about justice and ethics. Patricia Norwood was already inside, her hands clasped in her lap, looking both nervous and determined. Beside her sat a young woman in her early 20s. She wore a hoodie pulled low over her forehead, trying to stay anonymous. Her dark eyes flicked in between Naomi and Gabrielle, hesitant but resolute. "Monica, this is Naomi Bennett," Patricia said gently. "She's the one who was arrested, and this is her sister, Gabrielle Bennett." the U.S. Attorney General. Monica's eyes widened in shock. She cleared her throat, her voice trembling. I'm sorry this happened to you, she murmured. I've seen enough. I don't trust the police in Brookhaven. She hesitated, glancing down at her hands before continuing. I was driving home from a friend's place when I saw the traffic stop. Something felt off, so I started filming on my phone. At first, I was just capturing the tail end of the conversation, but then I saw the officer slip something into your purse. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Here was proof. Living proof that what she had experienced was not paranoia, not exaggeration, but real. Thank you for coming forward, she said, voice thick with emotion. Gabrielle gave the young woman a firm but kind look. Monica, we understand this is scary, she said, but your testimony and that video could expose corruption. You're doing the right thing. Agent Caldwell nodded in agreement. We can offer you protection if you feel threatened. Monica swallowed hard, then pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked, but she navigated to a video file. Agent Caldwell produced a laptop and a cable to transfer the footage for safekeeping. When the video played, Naomi felt her stomach drop. The footage was shaky, filmed through a partially rolled-down car window at night. But the audio was surprisingly clear. Naomi could be seen standing beside her vehicle, hands raised. Officer Keller shined a flashlight toward her, while Officer Cooper crouched near the trunk, rifling through her belongings. Then it happened, a telling moment. Cooper reached into his own vest pocket, withdrawing a small plastic bag. Then, in a smooth, deliberate motion, he slipped it into Naomi's open purse. Naomi exhaled sharply. There it was, the truth. Agent Caldwell didn't blink. He immediately called another agent to secure this evidence and ensure multiple encrypted copies were made. This video alone changes everything, he said gravely. At that moment, back at Brookhaven PD, the walls were closing in. Keller and Cooper's attempts to destroy evidence had been thwarted by the FBI's tech team. Encrypted copies of body cam logs, dash cam data, and internal communications had already been extracted. And Officer Malik Thomas, once hesitant, was now cooperating. In the process, the FBI had uncovered patterns, multiple instances of malfunctioning body cams during stops involving people of color, falsified police reports, and an orchestrated cover-up that went far beyond Naomi's case. As the grand jury hearing approached, Brookhaven PD was in full-blown crisis mode. The morning of the hearing dawned hot and humid, the Georgia sun already beating down on the pavement. Downtown Atlanta was buzzing. Word had spread about the scandal in Brookhaven PD. Protesters, journalists, and national media outlets gathered outside the courthouse. Signs raised high, "Justice for Naomi Bennett. Corruption must end. Hold officers accountable." Inside, the courthouse was packed. The hearing room was filled with journalists, community leaders, and legal teams. Naomi walked in, flanked by Gabrielle and federal agents. Her pulse pounded as she spotted Keller, Cooper, and Chief Langston seated on the defense side. Chief Langston looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. His usual air of confidence was gone, replaced by a grim, tight-lipped silence. Agent Caldwell leaned in close, speaking in a low voice. "We've identified at least 7 officers involved in falsifying reports and planting evidence. Most of them flipped, turning on each other to secure plea deals." Naomi nodded. Her hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists of resolve. She thought of her students at the community center, the kids she had always told to stand up for what's right. This was her moment. The hearing began. She was called to the stand early, her heart fluttering as she took her seat. When the defense attorney tried to discredit her, painting her as nervous and uncooperative, she held her ground. "My only crime that night was driving home while black in a town where officers thought they could silence me," she said, voice unwavering. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution team played the video evidence, Monica's footage. The entire room fell silent. Then came the dashcam footage, and the suspicious audio cut out at the exact moment the drugs appeared. Finally, internal police records were displayed, showing that Brookhaven PD had a history of suspicious arrests under Keller and Cooper. Naomi could feel the weight of the moment. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been wronged and silenced before her. And as the hearing unfolded, it became clear. Brookhaven PD was about to fall. Every detail of the case had been presented, every contradiction exposed. But the turning point came when the prosecution played Monica's cell phone footage on the courtroom's large display monitors. The entire courtroom held its breath as the damning evidence played in full view. There it was, Officer Cooper, clear as day, slipping the bag into Naomi Bennett's purse. A wave of gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the defense attorneys knew the game was up. Cooper's lawyer slumped visibly in his chair, his hands clasped together as if he were bracing for impact. And the blows kept coming. Next came testimonies from other victims of similar stops, painting a pattern of discrimination, intimidation, and corruption. Then Officer Malik Thomas took the stand. He spoke hesitantly at first, but his voice gained strength as he described the internal pressure within Brookhaven PD, the unspoken code of silence that had kept so many officers from speaking out. He described how evidence mysteriously appeared when officers needed an arrest, how body cameras conveniently malfunctioned, and how officers like Keller and Cooper were protected by the system. "I stayed quiet for too long," Thomas admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "But I'm done looking the other way." Then came the final moment. Keller and Cooper were given a chance to speak. For the first time since the trial began, they had nowhere left to hide. Cooper, his face pale and clammy, stammered through a weak excuse, claiming he was under pressure and had made a mistake. Keller, however, refused to back down. His self-righteous arrogance remained, even as the evidence stacked against him. "She was working with criminals," he spat, his face flushed with anger. "This is a witch hunt. The media and those federal agents have twisted the truth." It was a desperate, pitiful display, one that only further cemented his guilt in the eyes of the courtroom. Then came Chief Langston, facing a litany of charges, obstruction, conspiracy, and gross negligence. He attempted one final move to save himself. "I was misled," he claimed, trying to shift the blame to Keller and Cooper. "I had no idea things were this bad." But the prosecution wasn't finished. They presented email records, ignored complaints, and internal memos proving that Langston had not only been aware of the department's actions, he had actively encouraged them. The weight of it all settled on the once powerful police chief, his face turning ashen as he realized his fate was sealed. Finally, after days of testimony, the grand jury returned its decision. The courtroom fell into silence as the foreperson stood to read the verdict. Guilty, Keller, guilty, Cooper, guilty, Chief Langston, guilty. And with that, the courthouse erupted into murmurs and exclamations. Federal marshals stepped forward to take Keller, Cooper, Langston, and several other complicit officers into custody. The same cold steel cuffs they had once slapped onto others without cause were now locked around their own wrists. As Cooper was led away, he turned his head and locked eyes with Naomi. His venomous glare burned with hatred and resentment, as if blaming her for his downfall. But Naomi didn't flinch. She held her head high, refusing to be intimidated. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Activists, community members, and supporters held signs high. Justice for Naomi. No more dirty cops. Accountability for all. Naomi stood at the podium, her sister Gabrielle by her side. A sea of microphones and cameras surrounded them. Gabrielle spoke first, her voice steady and powerful. "Today, justice has prevailed. But let's not forget that this fight isn't over. This is not just about one corrupt department. It's about ensuring that law enforcement across this country upholds the highest standards of integrity. We must continue to fight for reforms that protect citizens and hold those in power accountable." Then Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was shaky at first, but as she spoke, a quiet strength took over. "I want to thank everyone who stood by me, who believed in me. I especially want to thank Monica for her courage in filming the truth. This experience taught me how fragile justice can be, but also how strong it becomes when good people stand together. Let's make sure no one else has to go through this again." Reporters shouted questions, but Naomi and Gabrielle had said what needed to be said. As they stepped away, a sense of finality washed over Naomi, but she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A new path lay ahead, not just for her, not just for Brookhaven, for the future of justice itself. In the weeks that followed, the hammer of justice fell hard. Keller and Cooper were convicted of multiple counts: conspiracy, falsifying evidence, and civil rights violations. Chief Langston received a stiff sentence as well. Brookhaven PD underwent a massive overhaul, Corrupt officers were fired, new ones were carefully vetted, and strict new oversight policies were implemented. The mayor issued a public apology, pledging to rebuild trust with the community. Community members worked tirelessly to push for lasting reform, including citizen review boards, body cam transparency, and anti-bias training. And Naomi? She returned to the community center, more determined than ever to educate and empower the next generation. A mural was painted outside the center, a tribute to civil rights leaders, alongside 3 words: justice, accountability, hope. Naomi smiled when she saw it, because this wasn't just her story. This was the story of every person who had ever been silenced, but refused to stay quiet. Gabrielle returned to Washington, her plate full with other cases. But she kept in close touch with Naomi, knowing this case had changed them both. Meanwhile, Officer Malik Thomas was honored for breaking the code of silence, proving that good officers still exist. And Monica, she no longer lived in fear. She had become a hero in Brookhaven, proving that one person with a phone could change the course of justice. Months later, as Naomi spoke at a youth seminar, she saw her story resonate in their eyes. She had been knocked down, but she had stood back up. And that's how real change begins. The story of Naomi Bennett is more than just a tale of injustice. It's a powerful reminder of the strength found in truth, unity, and courage. At its core, this case highlights a fundamental lesson. The pursuit of justice requires people to stand up, speak out, and refuse to be silenced, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Naomi's ordeal began with something so common, a routine traffic stop. But as we saw, what should have been a brief encounter turned into a life-altering nightmare, exposing deep-rooted corruption within the Brookhaven Police Department. The officers who framed her were not just acting on personal biases, they were part of a larger, systemic problem, one that thrives in silence and fear. However, Naomi's story proves that corruption only wins when good people do nothing. It took a single person willing to document the truth, Monica, to shatter the carefully built lies. It took an officer, Malik Thomas, willing to break the blue wall of silence to bring accountability. It took a sister, Gabrielle Bennett, who used her position of power to demand justice. Most importantly, it took Naomi's own unwavering strength to keep fighting, even when it seemed like the entire system was against her. One of the most important takeaways from this story is that ordinary people have the power to make extraordinary change. Monica, a bystander with a cell phone, could have driven past Naomi's arrest that night, but she trusted her instincts, took a risk, and captured the proof that would ultimately bring down a corrupt department. Officer Thomas, though afraid of the consequences, knew that real integrity meant doing what was right, not what was easy. Their choices remind us that justice is not just the responsibility of those in power. It is the responsibility of every single person who refuses to turn a blind eye. Another critical lesson is that justice is fragile. It must be actively defended. Naomi was lucky to have a powerful advocate in her sister, but how many others have faced similar injustices without the means to fight back? How many cases have been swept under the rug because there was no one to record the moment the truth was buried? The reality is, for every Naomi Bennett who fights back, there are countless others who are falsely accused, unjustly arrested, and left without a voice. That is why systems must change, not just individual cases. True justice isn't just about holding bad cops accountable. It's about preventing corruption from ever taking root in the first place. Ultimately, this story teaches us that courage, truth, and unity can overcome even the most deeply entrenched injustices. It reminds us that one person standing alone may struggle, but together we can dismantle even the most corrupt systems. The road to change is long, but as Naomi proved, it only takes one moment of courage to light the way forward. Naomi Bennett's story is a powerful reminder that justice only prevails when we stand together. It took courage, truth, and unity to expose corruption and demand accountability. And that same power lies in each and every one of us. If this story inspired you, help spread the message. Like this video to show your support for justice. Comment below and share your thoughts. What lessons did you take away from Naomi's fight? Share this video with your friends and family, because awareness is the first step toward change. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and the fight for what's right. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update.